5 shifts that a leader of leaders has to make. I remember when I got a promotion one time where I moved up the pipeline, and I was smart enough to know I didn't know what to do. So I start digging around looking for books, and I found 2 books that were really significant. One book was What Got You Here Won't Get You There by Marshall Goldsmith. The second book, Brian has it on his shelf, and the second book was You're in Charge, Now What? Both of those books had an impact on the way I thought about leadership. Because when you begin to move to a different level, you have to think differently in order to behave differently. And a lot of times when people go from leading others to leader of leaders, they don't learn how to think differently. Therefore, they don't learn how to behave differently. And so it's really, really critical that they understand that now they have to think different and behave different. Think about Joshua in Joshua chapter 1. Joshua has all of a sudden found himself in charge of all the Hebrew people, taking over from Moses, stepping into some really big shoes. And God knew that Joshua was going to have to change his way of thinking. So the very outset, God sat down with him and he had a talk. And that talk was designed, big part of it was to get him to change his way of thinking, because God knew there were changes that were going to have to that were taking place. He had to shift from a desert mentality to a promised land mentality, from a peace mentality to a wartime mentality. He had to shift from supporting the leader's decisions to making decisions. And so there are all these different, he had to shift from courage, from fear to courage. There's all these shifts that had to happen, and God knew that, and he was helping him make that by having this talk with him to shift his thinking in order to shift his behaviors. So let me give you 5 shifts that I think leaders of leaders have to make. And this may help you think in terms of how you're training them and how you're even recruiting them. I don't know. I never thought about that till just now. But here's shift number 1. A leader of leaders has to shift from telling to asking. From telling to asking. Leaders tend not to ask a lot of questions. They tend to make decisions because they're new in leadership. At the leader of leader level, you have to learn to ask more questions. Questions are a powerful way to lead. And so leading with questions, here's why it's important. Leading with questions places a higher value on your leader's thinking, on their thoughts, not just my thoughts. So a leader of leaders has to ask more questions because he's now valuing the thoughts of the leaders underneath him. And here's the power of it. It helps him get their ideas, their input, and their innovation. Therefore, it gets their buy-in as well. So the more questions I ask as a leader, the smarter we get as a team. All right. Let me give you a few what I call power questions. Okay. One power question that I love to ask is, what would you have done in that situation and why? What would you have done in that situation and why? And I can send you these. I'll post these in the Facebook group. What do we need to stop doing so that we can do more of what is most important? And talking about that, getting your leader of leaders, your coach, to talk about that with their leaders. What leadership lesson can we learn from what just happened? That's a huge question. Sitting down with your leaders and asking, if we had the world's leading authority on this topic sitting in front of us right now, what questions would we ask? That will help you get inside the minds of your leaders. And so those are just some examples of some power questions. Shift number 2. Shift number 2 is from leading people the same to leading people based on situation. From leading people the same, leading everybody the same, to leading them based on situation. When I was in the seminary, Dr. Howard Hendricks had us read the book Leadership and the 1-Minute Manager. And a lot of you have heard me talk about this. And that's where I first learned situational leadership. It is core to my leadership style now. And so I just think when you hit that leader of leaders level, this has to become core in your way of thinking, okay? Because I won't go through the whole deal, but Blanchard teaches 4 styles of leadership. There's the directive style. That's telling. hey, here's what I need you to do. There's the coaching style. That's asking them questions so you can uncover their problem and then you tell them what to do. There's supporting. That's asking them questions and affirming their decision, but you do not tell them what to do. And then there's delegating, and that's staying out of the way. It's just, hey, they got this, stay out of their way. And so that's 4 styles of leadership. So here's the problem. Most people only lead with one style of leadership. Therefore, they're leading everybody the same, and that means it's likely that all their people are frustrated 75% of the time. So you have to learn situational leadership as you begin to hit that level of leadership. Shift number 3 is from equipping for compliance to equipping to ownership. From equipping to compliance to equipping for ownership. Leaders typically, because they're young and they're new, and I just need everybody to follow the rules. I just need everybody to do what they're supposed to do. And if we can minimize problems, I'm happy. And just stay within the lines. Okay. Listen, when you're at the leader of leaders level and you're expecting that of your leaders, that's not leadership. You're not asking them for leadership. You're asking them for functional administration. There's a big difference between leadership and functional administration. So we want to, if you're at the leaders level, you want your people to lead. You want them to be owners. Now, there are 4 types of people on your teams. Okay. There's the spectator. That's the person who's on your team, but they don't do anything. All right. They're just watching everybody else do the work. There's the participant. This is somebody who's contributing, but they're only doing what's minimally required. When they talk, they use the word they instead of we. You hear them using, when they're talking about their own team, they go, well, yeah, they made a decision to do that. All right. They're a participant. Third, contributor. This is somebody who does what's expected of them. They use the word we, and they will go above and beyond if you ask them to. Typically not on their own, but they will if you ask them to. And then the 4th type of person on your team is an owner. This is somebody who consistently uses the word we. They're constantly asking, how can we do things better as a team? And they're offering ideas for improvement. And so they see this as their responsibility. And so they contribute like an owner. So that's 4 types of people. A leader of leaders understands that and recognizes, I want to move more people up to be owners. I want my leaders to be owners. How do you do that? 4 ways. 4 ways really quick. There's a conversational approach. That's sitting down with the person who is a spectator, who is a participant or contributor, and just having a conversation, getting to know who they are, how they're wired, what their passion is, so that you can pour fuel on who they are and get them excited about being an owner. Second is collaboration approach. Collaboration approach is inviting them to dream with you. It's sitting down with somebody that's not an owner and saying, hey, I've been thinking through some things. I just want to dream. Would you brainstorm with me? Would you just dream? I'd love to get your ideas and your opinions. Man, there's nothing like getting somebody's ideas and opinions to create ownership. Third approach is the challenge approach. Some people are spectators, contributors, just because they're bored. They're just bored. So it's sitting down with them and just literally looking at them and just saying, hey, man, you got so much more to offer. I've got a stretch assignment that I think is perfect for you. And give them a stretch assignment, challenge them, and see if you can get a little fire inside their belly. And then the last one is the confrontation approach. And that's when you just walk up to them and you say, hey, you seem to be disconnected. What can I do to help you to get more excited about what we're doing? And so that's 4 approaches to those 4 types of people. But here's the key. A leader of leaders has to stop making so many decisions and push decisions down, because teaching your leaders to make decisions, teaching them how to make decisions, injects organizational DNA into your leaders. Once I teach somebody how I make decisions and they learn the way I'm making decisions, my mindset, It's injecting organizational DNA in them, and therefore you can trust them to make decisions because you've taught them how to make decisions through the grid of your own values. All right, shift number 4. Shift number 4 is the shift from being a genius to raising geniuses. From being a genius to raising geniuses. Many times leaders are recognized for their contribution, okay? And that's okay. But a leader of leaders should be recognized for the contribution of their team. It's their team's contribution that should be recognized, not their contribution. A big difference. So there's this guy, Adrian Dillon. He's former CEO of Skype. And he tells this story. He was leading a meeting. And he was young in the organization. He wasn't CEO. He was way down in the organization and manager somewhere. And he was leading a team. And he said he was having a really good meeting when all of a sudden the CEO of the company walked in and sat down and said, "Don't mind me, I'm just watching." And so he sat down, and Adrian's leading this meeting, and he said, "Man, I was so proud of myself. I was making decisions. I was solving problems. I was establishing timelines. I was delegating responsibility." We finished the meeting, and I was like, "Man, drop the mic and walk out. I just killed it." So he said, everybody left but the CEO. The CEO sat down with him. And he said, "Adrian, that was a really good meeting." He went, "Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you." He said, but that's not a compliment. Here's what he told him. He said, "That was a great meeting, but your problem is you still think it's your job to be the smartest guy in the room. It's not anymore. If you want to have my job or a job like mine, at this point, you can't do it all on your own anymore. At this point, what you've got to do is not prove that you're the smartest guy in the room, but make everybody else think that they're the smartest guy in the room. You've got to teach them what you know and what you do. You have to teach them what you know and what you do, not tell them what to do." Big, big difference. That's a big shift for a lot of people. And then the last one is this: shift from silo thinking to synergy thinking. Silo thinking to synergy thinking. At the leader of leaders level, you have to break out of silo thinking. Typical church always thinks in departmental silos. Nobody thinks, groups doesn't think about how children's does things. Children's doesn't think about how worship does things. At this level, you got to start thinking, how does this synergize across all departments? How are we working together? How are we all doing this together? And so begin to think about how can we synergize our efforts around things in order to save time, money, and resources. And so this is getting, a leader of leaders is really good about getting their leaders together and sharing best practices. You can even be siloed in, let's say, a small group ministry. You got 20 small groups, you got 20 silos. You have 20 silos. But a coach can pull their leaders together and say, let's say a coach is overseeing 5 leaders, pull them together and say, "Hey, let's share some best practices. What can we learn from each other? How can we make each other better?" And that's what a leader of leaders does. And so I'll finish with this. Becoming a leader of leaders requires us to think differently, because when you think differently, you will behave differently. And so as you think about training for that coach level, leader of leaders level, remember, target their thinking, because if you don't target their thinking, they will behave like a leader because they're thinking like a leader, not a leader of leaders.